Have you ever spelled out a word because you didn't want your dog to hear it? Like WALK or TREAT, or get in the car, we're going to go to the VET. We do it instinctively because we already know they're listening. But recent research suggests something a little more surprising may be going on. Some dogs may not just be listening, they may be quietly paying attention to things we never meant to teach them. And once you hear how, it sounds kind of unbelievable. But then you stop and think about it, and it also kind of makes sense. We usually think of dog learning as very intentional. We give a command, we repeat it, we reward it, sit, stay, fetch. That's how learning works, right? But what if some dogs don't actually need all of that? What if they're picking things up simply by being around us? Not because we're training them, but because they're quietly noticing more than we realize. Not just how observant are they. And before your imagination runs wild, no, dogs are not putting on tiny lab coats and following us around with clipboards and carefully documenting what time we brush our teeth on Tuesday evenings. They're not conducting experiments, and they're not holding meetings about us when we leave the room, as far as we know anyway. Although once you hear what the research team uncovered, you might be surprised how not that far off that joke actually is. But now you're probably wondering, what kind of secrets are they learning about us? And are they telling their friends or our neighbors things we don't necessarily want them to? Well, don't worry. To be clear, this isn't about all dogs, and we're definitely not saying dogs understand language the way people do. They're probably not going to start speaking in complete sentences that your high school English teacher would appreciate anytime soon. But a group of researchers has identified a very rare set of dogs called gifted word learner dogs. Only a few dozen are known worldwide, and these dogs already understand the names of dozens and sometimes even hundreds of objects. Not commands, actual labels. Ball, rope, desk, frisbee, carrot. And the people behind this research wanted to know something very specific. How far does that ability really go? Can a dog learn something new without being directly taught at all? Now, to explore that question, the research team worked with 10 of these gifted dogs. And these weren't random dogs pulled off the street. Come on, Fido. Come on, Max. Now, most of them came from breeds already known for strong working intelligence, dogs like border collies and other herding or working breeds. And that doesn't mean only those breeds are capable of this kind of learning, but it does mean these dogs already had a history of paying close attention to humans and learning complex associations. In fact, many of them already knew the names of dozens and maybe even hundreds of toys before the study even began. So these were not beginners. They were dogs who had already shown an unusual ability to connect words with objects. What the researchers wanted to find out was whether that ability required direct teaching or whether something else might be happening. Here was the core question: can a dog learn something new without being directly taught it? No commands, no look at me, no training sessions, not even being addressed, just by being present. In the first part of the experiment, the owners did exactly what you would expect. They introduced a brand new toy, they named it clearly, they interacted with the dogs learned the name. Nothing surprising there. But then came the interesting part. The research team changed just one thing. In the second test, the owners talked about the new toy, but not to the dog. They spoke to another person in the room, and the dog wasn't even addressed. No cues, no commands, no pointing, no eye contact. The dog was just there, hanging out, listening in on a conversation that wasn't even meant for them. Now here's where a lot of people start thinking, okay, but couldn't the dog just be guessing? Wouldn't they just grab the newest, most exciting toy they found? The research team thought of that too. When the dogs were later asked to retrieve the new toy by name, the toy wasn't sitting by itself. It was placed among several other toys, including toys the dog already knew well and toys the dog didn't. So the dog couldn't just grab anything new. They had to choose one specific object based on a word that they had overheard. Now that detail matters because it means the dog wasn't just reacting to novelty, they were making a deliberate choice. And before we move on, I just want to tell you, if you stick with us till the end, we've got a little surprise for you. Now, another question people often ask about this is, how long did the dog have to hear the word? And the answer is not very long. The conversations about the new toy didn't happen over weeks or months. They happened across a handful of short, casual conversations, the kind you might naturally have in your home. Not a lecture, not repetition drills, just normal human talk conversations. Then, after a short gap of time, the dog was asked to retrieve the toy by name. And 7 out of the 10 dogs chose correctly. Now, let that sink in for a second. They learned the word without anyone intentionally teaching them. No one said, "Look at your new turtle. Here's your new turtle. Go get your new turtle." They didn't hold it up. They didn't label it to the dog. They didn't identify it. They didn't reinforce it. They simply talked to someone else about the turtle while the dog happened to be in the room. And the dog paid attention. Now here's another way to picture it. Imagine you and someone else are chatting in the living room. There's a brand new toy, maybe a bright orange rope. You casually say something like, "Did you see where I put the orange rope?" Or, "I think maybe the orange rope is under the chair." You're not looking at the dog. You're not addressing them. You're not even thinking about teaching them anything. Later on, the dog is asked to fetch the orange rope from under a pile of toys. And they do. That's the moment when most people lean back and say, "Wait a minute, how did they know that?" The research team was careful about another important thing too. They worked to avoid unconscious cues, things like tone or pointing or body language that might tip the dog off. The owners weren't allowed to look at the dog while naming the object. They weren't allowed to emphasize the word, and the dog wasn't praised or corrected during the overheard conversations. In other words, the dogs were not being coached. They were simply present. And this kind of learning usually shows up in human toddlers. Now, around 1.5 years old, children start learning words just by overhearing adult conversations. They're not being taught, and they're not being tested. They're just noticing. And in this one very specific way, some dogs appear to be doing something remarkably similar. Not because they understand language, but because they're very good at picking up on what matters. When you think about it, though, dogs evolved right alongside of us, and they watch us constantly. They track our routines. They read tone and timing and context. Dogs are experts at watching humans. So maybe it's not that strange that a small number of dogs learn to connect words with objects without being directly involved. Maybe we've been underestimating just how much they pick up when they're quietly in the background. And this part matters. The research team is very clear. This doesn't mean dogs understand language the way humans do. And it doesn't mean your dog will suddenly start learning new words on their own. This ability appears to be really rare. But it does reveal something important about dog intelligence. What seems to be happening isn't language learning, it's social cognition. These dogs are highly tuned into human communication, who's talking and what's being referenced and what matters in the moment. They're not understanding sentences, they're building associations quietly and patiently. They're not trying to learn, they're not trying to be clever, they're simply very observant. And that leads to a humbling thought. We tend to assume privacy just because we're not speaking directly to someone. But for dogs, being left out of a conversation doesn't necessarily mean they're being unaware of it. Sometimes they may be paying closer attention than we give them credit for. Think about those moments when your dog seems to know something before you've said a word. Like they know when you're leaving, and they know when something's different, and they know when a routine is shifted. Maybe that's not intuition, maybe that's observation. There's something kind of wonderful about that too. Not because dogs are secretly human, but because intelligence doesn't always look loud or dramatic. Sometimes it's quiet, sometimes it's patient, sometimes it's just listening when no one thinks you are. So the next time your dog surprises you by understanding something you never taught him, it might not be magic, and it might not be coincidence. It might just be that they were paying attention all along. Sometimes being nearby is just enough. Now, we promised you a little reward for sticking with us, so here you go. Why did Pippi need to rest her voice? because she was a little husky. Thanks for hanging out with us, and we'll see you next time. FurEver.